So I'm kind of jumping in after that last workshop, which, based on how it ended, I'm only betting that it was incredible. But I just ran away from an Earth Day event to come over here because classic Earth Day event, um, running around town. Yeah. So anyway, that's a picture of me, and so I figured I'd start out with how I ended up in the position that I'm in, mostly because I think that it's important to do this kind of thing. It's important to come from science and go into these kinds of things. And so I figured this would be relevant. So I started out and I was having a good old regular time doing a PhD at Syracuse in soft matter, having a wonderful time, just like really getting into it and into the details of how biological cells move around, and then I don't know what happened. Something happened in 2016 that everybody went up in arms and everybody wanted to got riled up and started caring about policy. And so we founded a science policy group. We used the momentum of people really caring about that. And we organized the Syracuse March for Science. And that was kind of just a reaction at the time to what was going on in politics. Uh, but it was good and it was motivating, and we kept going with the science policy group. Um, and at the time, I was very lucky because I had advisors that cared a lot and were very skilled at science communication, right? And I think that I've learned that that's actually pretty rare. They cared about that. They cared about policy stuff. And so that was like present in my grad career the whole time. Um, and I was an Eigert fellow when I was there, and so I had access to some coursework for free, or access. I had to take extra coursework about um, policy and about science communication, and about these things. And yet at the time, I viewed myself as just a scientist with like a side hobby, um, and it took a long time to sink in. So then I came down here to Atlanta to work on some like origami physics stuff that I love, still thinking of myself as primarily, just a physicist with like just an interest in these other things that are like policy and communication related. And became and volunteered for about 3 years with an organization called Science for Georgia, which I really like Science for Georgia. I'll go into a little bit more of what they do. But along the way, I kind of realized that it's like, to some degree, a lot of this advocacy and communication stuff is like it's largely a matter of wanting to do it, it's something that you have to want to go do, but it's maybe not as big of a barrier as people might think, to getting started, because it was very accessible to me. um and then recently I did the citizen science program at Bard College, which is a really fun thing. Also teaching about all of these things. So hopefully I'm qualified, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm trustworthy teaching this workshop, but at points y'all will have the opportunity to like ask me questions, and I don't know, maybe my answers are right, maybe they're not. We'll find out. Um, but anyway, that's like me, and let's go to more slides. So what is Science for Georgia? Um, So I'm not going to talk too much about this, but we formed in 2018, and we have this like mission. We're a nonprofit. And I'll talk a little bit about what it means to be like a nonprofit interacting with policymakers, right? Because we're a 501(c)(3) and we have a mission, and we can lobby kind of. Actually, our executive director is a registered lobbyist in the state of Georgia, um, while working for Science for Georgia. But we can't, as an organization, say that we like endorse this person or this law or anything like that, but we can encourage people to vote for things, and we can provide evidence about things. And so that's a lot of what we do. And so our mission is, right, improving communication between scientists and the public, so general science communication stuff. Our mission's too broad. um So we do too much, but there's a lot to do. And so we want to increase public engagement with science, and we want to advocate. So I'm going to talk about part 3 here, which is advocating for the responsible use of science in public policy, right? And so it's a lot of our work. I might even say that this is actually secretly the cornerstone of our whole mission, and that everything else actually feeds into this, right? Because the more that we can get people to trust in science, and the more that we can get people to advocate alongside us, the stronger the advocacy is, right? Um, so yeah, how does the government work? Did y'all already learn about how the government works? Did we already do that? Is that like part of the previous?
I wouldn't say that it was explicitly part of the previous one, so it might be good to review.
I think it's really great to review because when I started working for Science for Georgia, I was like, yeah, I know how the government works. You don't have to tell me how the government works. And then it was like, I guess I kind of didn't. Um, and so yeah, I mean, there's like key breakdowns between like the real practicality of the US, the federal versus state versus local government, right? And so there's kind of this division, right, where we have at the top we have the federal government. They make the most powerful laws, right, that can override all the lower levels if they want to, but usually they set guardrails and have more broadly defined laws. And then as you go down, the impact on you goes up because they become more and more specific to you and your community, right? And so there's laws that apply at the federal level, and within those, the laws that apply in Georgia, and then the laws that apply in Atlanta, right? And then the reality of that, and like, I don't know what it's like in this room, but like, I guess everybody knows who the president is. A lot of people know who their US senator is and their representative, but not a lot of people know who their state senators and state representatives are, right? But the reality is that those people, them, city councils, mayors, people like that, are the ones that are actually controlling the things that affect your everyday life, often the most, right? They're actually controlling where the roads go and what the speed limits are and how to zone for what kind of things can actually show up in your neighborhood, controlling parks and also feeding back into that higher level stuff, right? Um, so like an example here is with education, right? Federal responsibilities would be like looking for ways to improve academic achievement overall, not maybe preventing or not maybe providing that much of the funding. And then at the state level, um, creating the system of how to fund the schools, right? And thinking about the whole school system, um, and developing like education criteria of like what it means to have been educated. But then at the local level, right, really we're controlling the funding there, um, adding more funding and maybe adding educational taxes to local residents, and doing a lot of things with that. And so that's an example with education, right? And so we've got the 3 branches, right? And everybody really knows what these are until we see how they actually come through in practice. And we have to remember that like the legislative side is technically the only branch that writes laws, right? So that's like mainly what they're doing is they're actually writing laws. They're writing bills, and they're passing them. And this is happening at every level, right? So you have at the federal level, you have your legislative, your executive, and your judicial branch, but then you also have that at the state level, right? Um, and so at each level, you have your legislature, just like a bunch of people in a room writing laws and talking to lawyers and then making votes and having really complicated systems where they have to do things by certain days. And yeah, and we'll get to that in a second, right? But we have these legislative things, and then we have the executive branch, not supposed to be making the laws, just supposed to be enforcing them, just supposed to be putting into place policy, um, to make the things happen and make sure that uh, that their jurisdiction or their, their region, so at the federal level, the whole country, at the state level, the whole state, making sure that they, putting in place policies that will keep us running within those guardrails set by the legislative, set by the laws, right? And so that kind of comes down the difference between policy and law, right? Policy is more meant to steer. That's an analogy that I've heard that I really liked with it. Like law is meant to provide the guardrails that you don't want to run into, and then policy is there to actually implement, to like actually give you the skills you need to drive the car to not run into the guardrails, right? Um, and so like policy is like a plan. And so that's a lot of what the executive branch does. And then the judicial branch says, okay, if these laws are getting challenged or people are running into the sidewalls here, running into these guardrails, then, well, we're going to see how that gets executed, right? We're going to actually interpret where the guardrail started, when you started to run into it or not, and put that into effect, right? Um, Hopefully this isn't too like, low level for everybody. I've always found so many people actually find this really helpful, at least even to be reminded of. Um, but yeah, and so if you focus on Georgia, right, the Georgia General Assembly, for example, I guess a lot of people here, I'm kind of curious, like, are a lot of people here in California? Is that like a lot of or is this like, are we all across the country in here? Like, does anyone know? I don't know. Maybe somebody said something in chat. I can't see the chat.
Yeah, there's some
Um,
activity in the chat. So we do have some folks from California because this event was co-hosted with UC Riverside, but we also have folks from all over Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia. We do have someone in Georgia, and several in California. So kind of all over.
yeah. All right, nice. We got somebody in Georgia. Let's hang out. Um, okay, cool. So yeah, and so like yeah, at every state's general assembly is a little different. Every state legislature is like a little bit different. Mostly they like run on different schedules and have different numbers of people for the things, but at the end of the day, they meet and they tend to meet in a session. They tend to have an upper and a lower house where you have representatives and you have state senators. Um, and yeah, and they get elected, and then they get together and go into a complicated process to pass laws, right? And so, um, strangely enough, uh, the Georgia General Assembly is one of the most accessible, from what I've heard, in that it's well, it's not accessible in this sense. They only meet for 2 months of the year, 3 months. Um, and the rest of the year they're just going about their day jobs, right? So these people aren't actually like doing this 24/7. A lot of them are lawyers, a lot of them like own businesses on the side, and then they take a break and they go do, the General Assembly 3 months of the year, basically. Um, but pretty much all of the events, like all of the committee meetings and subcommittee meetings, all of the voting, all of this is actually open to the public. Right. This is something that a lot of people don't know. And a lot of these, yeah, a lot of things in state legislatures are pretty open to the public when they're like considering a bill or something like that that you care about, or it's being talked about or voted on in a subcommittee. Um, Oftentimes you can just go to that, right? You don't have to have a special badge. You don't have to have some kind of a weird um special permission or like apply to go sit in that room. You just go in. Like when I go to the Georgia General Assembly, I walk in, I hand them my ID, they look at it, they go, okay, you're a person. I don't even think it has to be a Georgia license. And then you go in, and it's like the doors are open to the things that you want to go sit on and watch, right? And these panels are right there talking about stuff. And sometimes people stand up and they go, hey, the thing you just said, I disagree with that. And then they're like, okay. So, yeah, anyway, I'm rambling on. We'll get to like workshop activities in a second, but I'm going to do a little more reviewing. Um, so yes, they have this complicated legislative calendar, and it turns out in Georgia, so the session starts in January, um, and it has to end. It's like about March 28th. It has to end by the Masters. That's actually the rule. So the Masters being the golf tournament, and that's because this is Georgia. I don't know, but it's like, yeah, the legislative session ends, and then the Masters starts, and then that's the rest of the year. Then hopefully the bills that you needed to get passed during that time. Um, so as a general rule about this is like kind of a good guide for like how to interact with these legislators because you kind of want to be aware of the schedule that they're working on. You want to be aware of what time of year it is if you're going to talk to a representative, right? Because if it's between January and March in Georgia, um, they're busy, right? They don't want to hear about writing a new bill for next year. They don't want to hear about something that has no bills about it right now. They only want to hear your opinions on what's on their desk because they're getting thousands of bills on their desk, right? Um, and they just need to figure out which ones they need to be worried about, and they need to figure out which how they're going to vote on the ones that they know they're going to need to vote on. Um, and that's enough for them. And so the other thing that that means is that like, yeah, if you're together with like a local coalition trying to interact with these legislators, um, and the legislative session just ended, again, maybe you wait until like a few months later when they're like actually ready to start thinking about the legislative session because they're tired and they need to go pick things back up with their regular lives oftentimes. Um, so yeah, some of this communicating comes down to picking the time of the year. So based on what you want from your legislator. So okay, so it's like we're gonna go bottom to top here. We're gonna go, or I guess it's left to right, which is also bottom to top. We're gonna go up these steps, and they're drawn like steps because that's like, I don't know, visually motivating or something. So as we go from left to right, we're gonna go up. We're gonna get raised up, which is, I don't know, cool, I guess. Um, and so these are kind of the ways that we think about like if you're a community with an issue, um, we've made up this fake issue to talk about legislation before, where like piano farmers, we imagine that pianos are grown on a farm, and then we talk about how the piano farmers all need legislation to protect their piano farms or something like that. But that's too complicated. Um, so we're just gonna say farmers today, right? So I'm gonna say I'm a farmer in Georgia, and there's something where my farm is getting harmed. My ability to farm is getting harmed. Um, maybe because of a law or something like that, but I'm suffering and I need legislation to help me out, right? I need some zoning laws changed, or like I need something to change, or I need like a tax break, or I need a certain practice to be outlawed, like maybe that they're spreading chicken sludge. That's actually a real thing. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of chicken sludge, but that's something in Georgia where they actually, yeah, I'm gonna do an aside on chicken sludge because I think it's absolutely bananas. So there's a thing called a soil amendment, which is a real and good thing, which is where we take things that are fertilizery and apply them to land. It's called a land amendment. It's not a law. It's confusing in the legislature when they talk about soil amendments, but it's like you're amending the land. So it's a physical object called a soil amendment. The laws about soil amendments are very loose and they're not enforced very well. And so there's something that was happening where there's a lot of chicken farms in Georgia, and Basically, they were taking the leftover scraps from the chicken farms after processing, not treating them at all, grinding them up and spreading them on fields and calling it a land amendment. And that's not good for people. That hurts people's health because it's a huge health hazard. It's toxic. It hasn't been treated. It's just waste. It's just sewage spilled onto a field, right? So maybe I'm a farmer and maybe I'm hurt by that, right? Maybe that's messing up my ability to grow things. Maybe that's contaminating my farm, and I want to make change. Okay, so that's gonna be our fake but actually real problem here today as we go through these steps. And so you see step one here is going to be identify your problem and your solution. So let's start into that. Oh, good, I highlighted it. What a cool visual aid I did there. Neat. So we're going to do this as an exercise. So I just came up with my issue. And I know it sounded like I really planned out that little talk I just gave you about chicken sludge, but it turns out I just made that part up as an example. And so what I want each person here to do is if we can do, mm, let's not do small groups. Let's do individually. Let's do individually. I want each person to take a couple minutes and think of an issue, a technical issue that you need to communicate with the legislator about potentially that could be an issue that you care about, could be at the state level, could be at the federal level, doesn't matter, right? And so we're going to do a practice run of figuring out what your problem is. So what I want you to do is everybody take 5 minutes. What time is it? Yeah, it's 3-ish, 2:59. So I'm gonna give you all 5 minutes. You're gonna write down what you want people to know about your issue in 2 paragraphs. Just word dump for 2 paragraphs and write it out. Um, I'm gonna do it too. So we're not alone doing it. I'm gonna come up with my issue. Okay, cool. All right, and go ahead. Okay, that was about 5 minutes, I think. Hopefully everybody wrote some stuff down. Did y'all do something like this in the previous session?
Not quite. The previous session was a little bit more along the lines of role playing what a Hill Day meeting might look like. So I think this was a really useful and new exercise.
Okay, cool. That's great. I'll maybe go a little quicker through the interacting, like at a Hill Day kind of thing part of this, and we'll cover other stuff. Um, but now that you've each written something down, I wrote something down about the Okefenokee Swamp. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it, but it's at risk of mining causing destruction. You basically have the swamp that exists there. It's the largest blackwater swamp in North America. It's in the south part of Georgia, and it exists because there is a ridge of heavy minerals holding it in place. Basically, the land is on a slant over many, 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 like, a few hundred miles. And then there's this blockage holding it all in there, like a pool with a deep end. And there's a company that wants to mine in that ridge and take apart all of the complicated geological structures that hold it there and put it back. And there's all these issues that'll arise. And I'm not gonna read everything about it right now, but like um there's issues that'll arise and a lot of experts who have insights into what'll happen if that gets done, right? And it'll compromise the integrity of the swamp, which holds all this. Is actually a huge carbon sink. Like it does all these great things for the ecosystems. Anyway, so I wrote down a whole lot of stuff that's like I could read it to you, but like that's boring. Um, what we're gonna do instead of that, we're gonna take that and we're gonna boil it down to 3 sentences. So take a couple minutes, boil everything that you had down to 3 sentences. Uh, 3 minutes. We'll meet in 3 minutes. All right, that was about 3 minutes. Hopefully people have 3 sentences written down about an issue that you care about. Maybe it took you a second to find the issue you wanted to write about. That's fine too. Um, but now we're going to do 2 steps in one. Very exciting. And we're going to, maybe you all saw this coming. You're going to bring it down to 1 sentence. You're going to write that sentence down. And then you're going to pick 5 words out of that sentence that kind of make a sentence, like 2 words for a subject, 2 words for an object, kind of a thing. Um, cool. All right, go ahead. 1 minute. All right, that's about a minute. So I have mining Okefenokee swamp hurts everyone. That's like 5. If I wanted to break my own rules a little bit, I'd say mining Okefenokee swamp hurts local business, because that's something you need to care about, even though that sounds gross when it's legislators. That's the language you got to speak. They hear about jobs, they hear about, you know, making jobs and making money and progress of industry. That's the language, at least in Georgia. I don't know, not everywhere. Um, but does anyone want to share? Does anyone have 5 to slightly more than 5 words they want to share? Don't be shy. It's a safe space. Let's see, maybe in chat. We've got STEM students need institutional support. That sounds pretty good. That's about 5 words. And presumably there's knowledge about education that you want to be imparting there, right? About educational values in STEM education, right? Anyone else want to share? Feel free to unmute if you want to as well. Stretch your voices out because, audio wise, I'm all alone up here, which is fun for me, but.
I'll take your offer up. Hi, I'm Lily. I'm from California. I was actually at the in-person session last week in Riverside. And so to your exercise, I appreciate this because I actually work in environmental protection. And so my few words are Kettleman Hills Facility draft permit decision. Kettleman Hills Facility, for those that don't know, is one of the largest hazardous waste facilities and landfill in the West. So that's what Kettleman Hills facility is.
Can you say Kettleman Hills facility? What was the whole
It,
sentence?
it's a hazardous waste site and landfill in a disadvantaged community in California. And there's a draft permit decision that a regulatory agency has open right now. So I'm breaking the rules of more than 5 words, but there's a 90-day public comment period for this draft permit decision of this hazardous waste site and landfill in a disadvantaged community in California.
This is great. What do you want to happen?
Public participation and meaningful engagement, and to your points about getting people interested in the issues that are intersectional with science and policy.
So I think key to this is, I mean, we can boil, you got cheated because, the name of the thing you're talking about is occupying too many of the words in your sentence.
I know I couldn't do it in 5 words.
But let's make sure that we'll just say the landfill, and we'll hope that we can communicate to people which facility when the
I
time
do
comes.
think
But
it
then
is
like make sure
important.
to include what you want to happen, right?
Okay,
Or
it's
like
more than a
what the
landfill
message
though.
is.
It's a toxic waste processing site as well as a landfill. So the fact that it actually processes highly toxic materials is a very important point. It's quote unquote not just a landfill.
That is key. But when I want to know 5 words about it, I want to just know that it exists and how you feel about it. Right. So let's make sure that we have how do you feel about it? In 3 words.
Angry, frustrated, and third word.
Is it because it's being executed poorly, in your opinion?
No, it's because in the past, the community has already voiced numerous concerns about it. And given it's a community of color largely and been historically marginalized, that's why it's all the more important that regulators hear what community has been saying for decades.
This is great. Um, what if the sentence was, and I already forgot the name, blank waste facility is environmental racism?
Yeah, I think that's important in addition to needing to uplift the hazardous waste processing that they do. So it's not just
Well,
a waste site, it's a
yeah.
toxics processing or something like
So
that.
so part of this exercise, right, and this is a great example, and thank you so much for sharing. It's kind of to remind us of the ways that our legislators think, right? They have at most, it's like if you're a computer programmer, they have like a pointer in their mind that's just like, oh, that it's a name and like that's a facility. And like the additional details often are lost on them, right? Of like the fact that it's more than a landfill. And like those things can be filled in for sure, especially if they pertain to what you want to happen with it, which I'm suspecting that maybe they do. But the important thing is when we get down to 5 words, it doesn't mean that we're leaving everything behind forever. It means that we're filling back in with the stuff that we need, right? And it's to avoid something which of course you didn't do. Um, but it's important to be aware that it's like, especially when we're really close to an issue, we start with explaining it in the ways that the people already involved in the issue think about it. And we try to use like this language that acknowledges many of the things that are involved with it. And oftentimes when you're talking to a policymaker, those things lose them and can be filled in with them kind of like appropriately later. And so it's important to lead with like what it is and how you feel about it. And like that's the core of your message. And then to fill in those additional details according to what they need to hear. Right. Um, and so that's kind of the point of this exercise. Does anybody else want to share? That was great. Thank you for sharing though. I mean, that's key information as well, you know? No, are we feeling shy? It's a long day, maybe. I don't know. We don't have to share. Maybe people want to share more stuff later. But the goal now is from here, now you have like a main point, right? So in my case, it was this thing is bad, right? And I need to build up around that. Ooh, stormwater capture can save California drought. That's a great one. Yep. Stormwater capture. Right. I see the issue in that, and I see the I see the what, I see the who, right? This is great. So when you have your 5 words, or maybe a couple more if you really need to, um, you think of that as like your guiding notion. Because when we go back into step 2, we're going to want to make sure that we use that kind of as our guiding, as our North Star, I guess, it's like an analogy phrase there that people use. Because when you craft a grassroots movement and when you're trying to get people involved with you, things might change. You need to make sure that you're appealing to everybody's interests. Cool. Oh, and I have to click back on this. I guess there's that graphic that I didn't show you. That's great. Okay, so the next thing is form a posse, right? So what does that mean? So the point of forming a posse, right, is like I can just call my legislator out of the blue and be like, I'm a person and I think this. And that's like good. That's like important to do. Um, but now we're starting to think about how to stand out from the crowd and make your legislator feel like there's a lot of people who feel the same way as you. Um, and also to share the burden of the work, right? When we're organizing and when we're doing stuff, you want to have people, working with you on this stuff. You want to have a community of people that can take on tasks and who want to make phone calls with you and who want to join a movement, right? And so like I was just hanging out with a really great posse that formed around environmental justice in South Fulton County, right? So Atlanta is a classic place where south of the city is where a lot more environmental racism has happened and where all of the factories and warehouses and industrial waste sites and hazards are, and is also where the most black parts of the city are and where the most disadvantaged parts of the city end up being, right? So it's a classic example of environmental racism. And so there's a group down here who formed a posse and basically said, we know that we have all of these warehouses and all of these factories all around. We don't know that much about what it's doing to our health. But we know that we should be paying attention and doing something about it. And so they formed a group based on wanting to know more, which is often the case in environmental justice stuff early on, is wanting to know more. And so how do you form your core posse? So we got to think of the world as being in layers here. Um, so right at the core, and it's like maybe you and the closest people willing to be organizers. You and the committed are the people who are like really directly impacted by the issue. You're the people who are um, therefore more likely to prioritize and make time for effort with this, right? Um, Outside of that, you have more of like the broader, like a crowd, like people that are maybe living in nearby areas or like who are indirectly affected by it or are sympathetic because they're close with people who are directly affected by the issue that you're facing. Um, and you're going to communicate with these groups in slightly different ways and at slightly different stages. And so you want to start out with your core posse, right? And so the reason things are organized like this, right? How are you going to form a core posse? This is a slide I borrowed. I guess it's fun because it's science in the background. But you're not the center of their universe. So when you go to somebody and you say, "Hey, you care about this thing with me, devote some of your time in your life to working on this thing with me," right? You have to make it matter to them. And so part of this is communicating and thinking about Maslow's hierarchy. And so the most effective stuff is going to happen at the bottom. When you can appeal and make something relevant to people's basic needs of having health and security and safety and food, those are the people that are going to work with you, right? Those are going to be your most core posse. And I keep losing this. As we go up and things become less, I guess, essential, um, less basic of a need, uh, in terms of how your issue impacts them, in terms of how you can communicate how your issue impacts them. Those are going to be the further out parts of your group. Maybe people will still care, right? But they're not going to be able to devote the same amount of time um, into those efforts as the people who are really fundamentally impacted, right? And then, and then at the highest level, when people, you know, live way far away and aren't really affected by it, but are maybe just like, it's ideal and like the ideal version of me would be helpful with this. That's the hardest. Those people are going to be the hardest to get to really prioritize a lot of their time, but you might be able to get them to send a letter, right? And so we're going to interact with them in different ways. Um, yeah, and so early on, you want to be interacting in the short term. You want to be interacting with the people whose basic needs are important, and then eventually, longer term, you want to build out to the people who are less directly impacted in this hierarchy chart. So this is a great example. Let's talk about the US Constitution. We're not going to get really political about it. We're just going to go into like a little history moment because kind of like a fun example, right? Because if you really think about it, we're talking about like 250 years ago, um, before people knew that, you know, these independent, non, had a non-royal based governments were going to pan out. Like you had a bunch of like farmers who rebelled in a place and weren't really sure what was going to be happening and wanted to make sure that they were safe, right? I mean, people were out here in these colonies and the US Constitution had a lot of heavy lifting to do. There was a document before it whose name escapes me sometimes. Um, we needed this Constitution. We wanted everybody to sign on to it, right? In order to like form a nation. And so that's like you have to go around and like convince a bunch of people. This is kind of like forming a posse, right? Everybody had an issue, which is that like there isn't a binding contract keeping us together and keeping us from being reconquered by, by Britain. Um, and so like, yeah, we had to appeal to people. And so how do you do that? You add things like this, right? Establishing justice, right? We don't want people are scared of a lawless wasteland, right? And so hopefully as we go through these, you'll kind of see how these all appeal to people's basic needs and why people were willing to spend time and sign on to it, right? Because it gets right at what they're scared of. They're scared of having chaos and no law. Um, People are scared of want domestic tranquility. All these things sound great. The general welfare, that's a nice thing, right? All these things are going to get at your basic Maslow's hierarchy stuff. Secure the blessings of liberty, right? We want to be able to like basically farm. I think that was like a lot of what people wanted to do. They just wanted to like farm in peace and like be able to trade with each other. Um, which, I don't want to make it sound like the past was like really nice or anything, but the point is communication wise, there's a lot to be learned there, right? It's like, how did you get all these people to sign on to something wacky and new, like this constitution of just like, we're going to have this government for ourselves back at a time when that was like, I don't know, not really the thing that was going on compared to today. Um, and it's exactly this. It's by ensuring and promising all of the things that people are worried about, right? And so you keep that in mind as you're trying to get people into your posse here. What time is it? Okay, it's 3:30. Um, so in order to do that, we're going to need like a concise statement. We're going to need to be clear. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to take that stuff that we had before. We're going to take those 5 words, and we're going to expand back out into what we call a message box. No, these are out of order. We're going to talk about this first, actually. We're going to do the message box in a second because we're going to understand our audiences for a second. Um, this is the state of people that you're talking to anyway. I think this is relevant. So we'll just go through this and then we'll create a message box. And this will hopefully help us understand why we create a message box. Um, So yeah, the average person, when asked that, like, what comes to mind when you hear the phrase scientific research, like, nothing's in their mind. So you may be the technical person in whatever movement you're trying to work with, even if it's environmental, but people still might have no idea what scientific research looks like at all, right? Um, when asked if you can name a living scientist, 81% of the population cannot. They mostly said Einstein. Um, and the public believes these are things that the public tends to believe that scientists are intelligent. I guess it's different phrasings of this question, get slightly different answers, but then when asked if policy should be based on science, we get a little less. And then we get to scientists. This is this is not the answer of whether scientists are good communicators. This is whether the public believes that scientists are good communicators, which is still like about half. And I would say the public's wrong. Scientists are a lot worse at communicating on average because of the lack of training than the public uh, believes or knows about. That's my personal opinion. I think there should be way more science communication training in science education. Maybe people here feel the same way. Um, but these are the people that you're talking to a lot of the time. What else do we need to know about them? Um, yeah, confidence in science is waning. And so we have to keep that in mind. The word science doesn't necessarily bring the same, you know, unifying trust as it once did. Great. Now we're going to do the message box. How exciting. We're here. And so a message box, who's done the message box? I guess it's kind of hard to raise your hands. I can't even see if you're raising your hands, but if anyone wants to go in the chat and say that you've done the message box, I'll say wow. Um, but like, so this message box is kind of useful in the sense that you kind of go around it in a circle as you're describing a problem. So we start with a problem, and oftentimes that's what your 5 words was. Some of us jumped to having some of the solutions in the message in the 5 words, and that's okay. We can recraft, but you want to be able to state what the problem is, right? So in my case, there's Twin Pines wants to mine Trail Ridge next to the Okefenokee Swamp. But then I got to say, why do I care, right? So this is important in how we do messaging. So as we go around, so we go from problem, then we go to so what. So what is why should I care? Why should anyone care? Why should my legislator care? Why should the person who I want to be in my core posse care? Right. And so we go to so what? And so for me, so what? Well, we're going to destroy an ecosystem if we mine next to Okefenokee Swamp in the Trail Ridge. Solution is straightforward, right? So we continue around, we go to solution. The solution is don't mine there. The solution more specifically is pass the Okefenokee Act, which maybe I'll talk even more about later. But pass the Okefenokee Act to protect the Okefenokee Trail Ridge specific parts against mining eternally, right? Uh, that's the solution to this problem. And the benefits are you don't destroy an ecosystem, you support that whole tourism and the culture of community and land stewards that exist around it. All of the carbon that's stored there, right? There's like endless benefits to this, but maybe you just want to pick one. Huge benefit to the ecosystems of South Georgia. And people and the whole tourism industry down there doesn't lose their jobs because people care about jobs. Maybe we'll do another example, but it's important to notice that these come in pairs. So the problem is connected to the solution. So they're connected across the message box vertically. So if my problem is my house is on fire, the solution needs to correspond to that problem. Put out the fire, right? So they need to match across. And then they match left and right as well. My neighbors, this is why you should care, be in my posse that's about to put out my house that's on fire with me. You should care because your house is going to burn down too. And the benefits, again, correspond with that. Save lives and save property. Um, and going around this message box, even though it seems really simple, it is really simple. That's one of the key aspects of communicating, especially with legislators, is keeping it simple. Being straightforward like this, only including the details that you need to. So why don't we let's take 5 minutes and everybody can write down, figure out, take a step back. You had your 5 words and try to create a message box, create a problem, or like identify what the problem is. Don't create a problem. That's not nice. But find out what the problem is, write it down if you can in 5 words. Just try to keep it short. Then do the so what? Why do we care? Write down the solution corresponding to the problem, and then write down the benefits that come from that solution and that address the so what. So we'll come back in 5 minutes. That was like 4 minutes, but I feel like maybe we got it at this point. I gave y'all 2 examples about houses burning down and about the Okefenokee Swamp. So does anybody else want to share what they've got?
So we did just get one in the chat. It says, so what? Air pollution harms public health. Benefits protect public health for all.
Great. I think the issue, this was following from what we heard before about this mixed landfill and toxic waste management facility. I'm probably messing the words up around that, but and so we kind of know that the problem is that facility is being handled improperly. And so I guess the only question I'm left with on that one, Lily, is what's the solution? Right? We want a specific thing to tell our legislator to do.
So I would suggest the solution is to control emissions, because that's the air pollution part. Like what comes out of these facilities is the pollution. And so somehow convincing the legislatures that you're breathing the same air everyone else is, and if we address where pollution is coming from, we all benefit.
Okay, so maybe that takes the form of a regulation that they apply to it, right?
Yeah, I
They,
would think so.
yeah, okay. So there's like, you know, this is a great example. Yeah, and in this case, I think it's really good. Um, we'll get to this in a second, but yeah, this is a great example. Anyone else want to share, or maybe we'll move on and catch a few more things before we run out of time. Does this go until 10 minutes to, or all the way until the hour?
Until 10 minutes to 3:50 Eastern.
Oh, okay, yeah. So let's wrap it up. Okay, cool. So now we'll go a little bit more briefly through actually interacting with the legislators on something like a Capitol Day, and I'll just say a few things about it generally. So nope. Okay, that was a whole other example that we didn't even use, right? And this is actually a really good one. I totally forgot this was in here. Marine life is harmed by sunscreen. Animals eat it. I eat animals. If they die, I lose a food source. That's not really the only reason we should care about marine life, but again, it's legislators. It's icky. Sometimes you got to use the reasons that maybe you don't like as much, at least personally. I don't know. Other people care about these reasons. Um, but yeah, zinc oxide is a good thing that can help with that. And the benefits being sun protection while having healthy fisheries, etc. Anyway, so we did this. And eventually we want to grow this, but now let's connect with the lawmakers. So yeah, the only thing I'm going to really communicate here is all the things leading up to this are also helpful in how you talk to your legislator. Keeping it simple, getting to the point and not getting too far into the details are absolutely key here. Um, but the part of the reason that you have a posse is when you talk to them, they need to they're trying to figure out how to vote on a bunch of shit, on a bunch of stuff. I shouldn't swear, on a bunch of stuff all the time. Sometimes they haven't made up their minds, honestly. Sometimes they're set in stone on it. You know, there's some people you'll just never move, and that's, pick your battles. Um, but if you're in their district, they assume you represent a lot of people. And if they get a group of people calling, they assume that you represent an even larger group of people, right? And so this is maybe something that was covered in the last session, um, as to why it's important to have things like capital days, right? And like going there in groups and like because they're gonna make the assumption of like, well, this is just the subset that was actually available and willing to come here today. But this actually could represent a lot of people that may or may not want to vote for me again, right? Um, and so keeping that in mind, that these legislators really are people that often you can influence. Um, Using a story as a hook to make it personal can be really useful. If you can find personal experiences um, to start off with, right? And if you can say like, so first we covered make it clear that you're in their district, or if you're not in their district, like I guess I can kind of talk to legislators outside of my district because I say I work for Science for Georgia, and then they think, oh, well, you kind of represent Georgia, don't you? Right. It's not as effective as actually being a voter in their district, though. But this is one of the first things you want to make clear is who you are and who you are as a person in their district. And then if you have a personal story, they're going to assume that you're not the only one with that personal story of how you're being affected by this issue. And so this is a part of how you state the problem. Often you might want to expand this into a story. So remember, the top of the message box was the problem, and that's where we might want to expand into a story, right? And just like give them a human thing because this is how humans intake information. I don't know. It's the most effective. Maybe not the most. Who knows? Maybe we'll think of something better. It's the best thing that I have right now. Um, but yeah, so when we do this, maybe this is familiar from last session, but again, this goes through, you can kind of see the effects of that problem and solution message box in here, right? So again, when I'm actually talking to a legislator, I'm saying who I am, right? And again, who you are is not just your name. Who you are is that you're in their district, or that you represent an organization. Who you are is your relationship to why they should care about why you're talking, right? Um, what is the situation is the problem, right? That's the problem part of our message box. Sometimes told with a story. Why it is relevant to them also comes through storytelling, but that's the so what, right? Um, uh, how many people it affects, that's expanding on that. That's a part of the so what. That's figuring out how it's actually connecting. That's implying to them how many voters are affected by this, right? Um, and then how to fix it. You got to have that solution there, right? And so hopefully y'all are seeing the effects of that problem and solution message box coming into this and how to guide uh, one of these conversations with a legislator. Um, Write a bill. How to write a bill. Don't write a bill. Thank you. That's the end of that section. Science for Georgia tried to write a resolution once and it was a huge mistake. Don't do it. There are people whose job it is to write the bill. Even if you have a cool posse, and even if one of the people in the posse is a lawyer, and even if you really want to make sure that it's written the way that you want it to be written, still don't do it. You're probably going to break the law. It's too hard. But you get the right legislator on your side. There are people that are hired to do this, right? They're on retainer within the legislature. there are specialist lawyers for this. So if you have a specialist lawyer on your side, like somebody from, you know, Southern Environmental Law Center, or like one of these organizations that deals directly with this issue, sure, that person can maybe write a bill. They can make the choice as to whether to write a bill, and they'll still want to probably collaborate with other experts on it. But this is, again, one of the reasons that you reach out early to legislators that you think will be helpful to your cause. And then you get it passed. I'm going to assume that a lot of this stuff was covered before. I don't know. This is why we have Hill Days. This is why we try to reach out to broader audiences. And I will say a brief thing about that, which is you need to understand how audiences hear information. And so the 6 ways that the public thinks about science is 23% want to hear a story, just want to hear a story, and then don't want to hear about facts. 20% still don't want facts and don't even want a story and just think whatever's going to happen is going to happen. We have no control over it, and I don't care to figure out how to control it. 20% still don't want facts, but will be told what to do. They'll be like, oh, I heard that scientists think I should do this. Okay, fine. I'll go do that. 15% do want facts. They want to do their own research. That's just 15%. This is one of the, in people's minds, the most overinflated numbers. We've got maybe a question in the chat. We're out of time. Let's wrap it up. But anyway, the point is, thinking about all of this, what you want to do, well, all of that amounts to why you approach talking to your legislator similar to the public. Using stories is important. Telling them what to do is important. Going into the details is not as important. That's where you lose audiences. But yeah, I guess I'll just wrap it up. These are just going to be some examples of what we've been doing. The Okefenokee Swamp, and advocating against banning puberty blockers, which they did not pass the ban against puberty blockers. Who knows? Maybe advocacy works. Anyway, I'll leave it there.